Now, forgive the long absence. In many ways, this programme today is pretty much almost in the form of a confession from me. So forgive me for not attending to your needs earlier than this, but I've been doing this for a reason. I've been waiting to see what would happen during the most recent SNP conference. Now, having allowed the dust to settle on things a little bit, having gone back through the transcript of various speeches made at the SNP conference, I've now been able to form some kind of a view of the situation with the SNP at the moment. Now, the optics so far have been awful, and it's not a secret that the main auditorium of the venue for this year's SNP conference was half full, compared to the previous conferences where that very same hall would have been packed. Now, this is, I suspect, a measure or an image which conveys somehow just how far the SNP has fallen from popularity with its own voters. And I was expecting to hear not just a post-mortem on why the SNP did so badly in the United Kingdom general elections, but also some concrete proposals for not only the resurrection of the party, but for some kind of plan for independence, some kind of process which we could all get behind in order to sort of pull things back together. Now, unfortunately, Mr. Swinney has rather disappointed everybody. His speech was extremely heavy in rhetoric, full of nice words and the sort of things you would expect a politician who allegedly supports independence to make, with basically statements of things like he wants to be more positive, more optimistic, or have more optimism about independence, refocus people's attention on the need for it, and so on and so forth, blah, blah, blah. The only note I think of, the only upbeat note that I actually detected in the conference came from man who used to be, I'm not sure if he still is, the Minister for Independence, Keith Brown. Now, Keith Brown made an oblique reference to the idea that the SNP might, and I emphasise the word might, drop its ridiculous insistence on voting for the SNP in both votes at the next Holyrood election. Now, it could be that the SNP's recent gubbing in the general election has focused their attention on the fact that if they don't do something soon, they're going to hemorrhage even more support, and other parties of independence are going to take up the cudgels in their place. So it could be that Keith Brown was basically just trying to stem the tide of people abandoning the SNP in favour of other parties, or in fact no party at all, by saying that he thought that maybe the party should consider the idea of abandoning the SNP 1 and 2 vote sort of rallying cry for the next general election at Holyrood in favour of reaching out to other independence parties. Now, this is a hint, but it's only a hint, of some kind of alliance or coalition with other parties of independence for the next general election at Holyrood. But unfortunately, there was nothing else of substance in Mr. Brown's comments. That it wasn't followed up either by Mr. Brown, and more especially, it certainly wasn't followed up by the First Minister, Mr. Swinney. Swinney sort of vacillated between the two imperatives of a party seeking re-election as a government, and those are, first of all, its prime function to seek re-election as a government. In other words, to appeal to voters on the basis of things that they normally would vote governments in to fix. Things like education, housing, jobs, the economy, the health service, and so on. And so Mr. Swinney's attention was divided between that imperative to get re-elected as government and to try and demonstrate competent governance of Scotland, with the imperative of getting Scotland out of the Union so that it makes governing it actually a more realistic proposition. Because we know that the SNP not only has its hands tied behind its back, but it's now wearing a blindfold, and it has had its legs cut off at the knees by the Labour administration in London, which has basically chopped its funding and forced the Scottish Government to make a whole lot of very unpopular cuts to its programme for Holyrood. Now, these include things like supporting charities, supporting social services, cutting the budgets of what I think you would have to say would be other forms of public support which are still needed, in, for example, social services, supporting people with disabilities, supporting the elderly, and so on, and trying to balance that up against the imperative of freeing Scotland from the exact reason why this is a problem. But the SNP, it seems to escape their attention that the reason for all these problems is nothing to do with their governments. It's to do with Westminster's governance. And unless we free the country from that, then there is no chance of an SNP government sweeping in to Holyrood and doing anything of any note whatsoever, other than, I suppose, plugging the holes in the sinking ship. So it was a mystery to me why Mr. Swinney missed this open goal and didn't actually refocus the entire party around a coherent plan for some kind of democratic process which would lead to independence through the Holyrood Parliament. Now, many commentators have said already that the answer to this problem would be for Holyrood to actually legislate its own abilities, to create those abilities to legislate on the Constitution in defiance of British rule. Now, to do that, you would need a big majority of MSPs at Holyrood to do it. Now, the first past the post voting system, which is normally used to elect the government in Holyrood, is patently not fundamentally as democratic as it could be, because a party which seeks governance in Holyrood has only to win the largest number of votes in any constituency to win the seat. It doesn't need a majority, so it needs to have the largest share of the votes to win that in the first past the post system. That is good for electing a government in the same way that the British government is elected, but that then leaves the second vote, the vote for the party of your choice. And historically, the SNP has insisted that everybody vote for them in that second vote, and that has led to the back door being opened to every single unionist party to get unearned seats in Holyrood, and thereby dilute the pro-independence majority of MSPs. Now, if the SNP were to abandon its ridiculous notion of voting SNP in both ballots, and actually said, we're going to do a deal with the ISP, with ALBA, and with the Socialists, and anyone else who is a pro-independence candidate, even standing as an independent, and they formed a coalition or an alliance which was formalised, and everybody knew that when that government was elected to Holyrood in a majority in this way, that it would legislate to give itself the powers necessary to have a vote on independence. And this is the key thing. That government needs to be much, much bigger. The majority in Holyrood needs to be overwhelming, and to do that, you need to do deals with other parties. And this is where Keith Brown, I felt, hinted and teased at the idea of doing this, but never followed it through. And Mr. Swinney just simply ignored it, which is baffling to me, since his administration would benefit enormously from this. Having a coalition with other pro-independence parties would strengthen his grip on government in 2026 and give it opportunities which it simply cannot get if it's stuck in the Union. So what I'm saying to you here is basically that this is a golden opportunity for the SNP to do something different, for a change, but it requires a major change both in the leadership style and possibly the leadership itself. And that would mean Mr. Swinney getting out of the way of somebody more able to lead the SNP in a far more radical and much, much more combative performance than the so-called bald eagle has managed to put up so far. So I think you can probably tell that I'm heavily motivated here by what I've seen, but not in a good way. I wanted to see so much more from the SNP than I've seen to date. And the reactions from the media so far, and of course it's the British media, so it's going to jump on this, have been to emphasise the fact that the hall in the SNP's conference during the keynote speech was half empty. And half empty is pretty much a summing up of Mr. Swinney's speech as well. It was heavy on the things you expect to see from somebody seeking re-election for government, but virtually absent of any substance on the main issue that people actually want to vote about in the general election in 2026. And that election has to be about independence only, with everything else taking second place. The promise of independence means that all of the other problems that Scotland currently faces due to being stuck in this union would disappear overnight, because when Scotland is independent, all of its funding comes to Scotland. We are not forced to give away 40% of our own income tax take to the Westminster Parliament, and we are not anymore forced to allow our natural resources to be stolen and sold from under us and then sold back to us at prices we can't afford. If we are in charge of everything, of every part of government, of every layer of Scotland, and it's all done here, then all of those problems vanish. They go completely. And before you start saying, but who's going to be the government, who's going to do all this, that is the reason why we need the coalition. We do not want the SNP in charge of absolutely everything. This needs to be a cross-party alliance of everyone, and all of the pro-independence movement needs to be involved in it. And that is something that the SNP so far has singularly failed to manage. They do not see why they should allow the people who actually vote for them to have any say at all in the process. And that's what's wrong with the SNP's approach just now. This is going to take a big national leader to come forward, not just to unite the parties, but to bring the independence movement into the same much larger political force. It is people who will propel us to independence. And without the people's votes, these parties have no chance of succeeding. And if the parties don't coalesce together into a formidable force that can defeat unionism, then there's no chance of any of it happening whatsoever. So this is my appeal to everybody out there who watches this programme, including politicians, media personalities, everyone who wants Scotland free and who wants all of these powers returned and all of our resources back, thank you very much, before the end of 2026. And it can and it should be done by our political parties, and they need to stop fighting each other and unite behind the common cause, because if they don't do that, not only will they be out of a job, but Scotland will be trapped in the Union indefinitely. Right at the moment, we are at rock bottom. From this point onwards, we can only go up. Anyway, that's it from Inde-Car today. I hope you find today's programme illuminating and possibly, I hope, a little bit more inspiring than some of the guff that is spilled out of the mouth of John Swinney and Keith Brown. In the meantime, keep the faith, but remember that Scotland is not just about one political party. It's about all the political parties. It's about everybody who votes for them, and it certainly is about all of us who want to be free of Westminster control for good. I'll see you soon. Bye for now.